Hi, John McElroy here, talking all things automotive. Talking all things automotive today with Chris Borroni-Bird.
Hi, John.
I think I first met you when you worked at Chrysler in advanced tech stuff.
Yeah.
Then you went to General Motors,
Yep.
and you created some really cool concepts there, including I want to call you. I mean, you pretty much came up with the idea of the skateboard with the autonomy
Yep.
concept car, right?
Yep.
And so you had the skateboard with the suspension, the steering, the
The wheel
brakes.
motors in each corner.
That's
Still,
right.
still has to happen, that part of the skateboard, but it will.
But it will. And I mean that really caught my attention because I thought this is brilliant. I mean, this is sort of like body on frame, but to a modern level.
Exactly. And we used the hydrogen fuel cell technology at the time because that was the big thing. But it made even more sense with batteries as a propulsion system or a power source.
And now we're starting to see moves towards that now too.
Yes, we are.
But you also came up with a pretty cool concept called ENVI, dash
Yes.
V. So tell us a little bit about that car too.
Yeah, that was an acronym, stands for Electric Networked Vehicle, that our Chinese colleagues came up with because it was demonstrated at the Shanghai World Expo in 2010. The vision for that World Expo was better city, better life. And we took that message to mean, how do we make the vehicle better for the city in terms of reducing pollution and parking space requirements and accidents? And how do we make people's lives better by being more convenient and taking time, less time to move around more efficiently and so forth. So it was a very interesting concept. These vehicles were really small footprint vehicles. They took very little space for parking. They had autonomous technology. So they had camera technology for vision sensing, as well as vehicle to vehicle communications. We demonstrated two of these pods platooning together with people inside each one video conferencing. So the vision we had at that time was, instead of everybody driving together in a four-passenger vehicle or a five-passenger vehicle, what if you had a train of vehicles and they could all go their own separate ways if they wanted to, but they could travel as a group and even have more social interaction than you have in a car, where people in the back seat are, you don't have much conversation with them usually. So it was kind of a fun project. And again, vehicle to vehicle communications, camera, vision sensing, electric platform, skateboard with motors in each wheel. It really was the first vehicle I can think of that was demonstrating what we now consider, the future mobility, which is autonomous connected electric vehicles and right size for urban environments.
Yeah. Uh, After GM, you also spent time at Qualcomm. You were at the MIT Media Lab. You were
Yeah.
at Waymo.
Yeah.
And this is all super high tech, bleeding edge stuff.
Yes.
But then you got involved in an effort that you called AFRE Car,
Yes.
which is the complete total opposite of everything that you had worked on, and went for simplicity. But you fill in the blanks here.
Yeah.
What was AFRE Car all about?
Well, it's a play on words because it was inspired by some volunteer work I was doing in Africa. And the idea was around how to create affordable mobility, or a free car, as a joke, kind of. And when I was at GM, I did have a time to, during vacation, to visit Mali, which is one of the poorest countries in the world, and working in rural villages on solar power systems and cook stoves and water pumps and so forth. And I got the idea, why not use solar power to provide mobility and have a shared vehicle that anybody in the village could use? And this would allow them to travel from one village to another. So this idea of a solar powered electric vehicle that was extremely lightweight and could be made out of wood or bamboo, readily available materials, and bicycle tires and so forth, but would have a solar panel roof and a small electric motor, because you don't need all the performance requirements or speed requirements to move around in those rural areas of Africa. It was a very simple idea, but it was happening at the same time as I was thinking of a right size vehicle for Shanghai, which was also an electric vehicle. So I was thinking about a different customer for this type of vehicle. And when I left Waymo in 2018, I started thinking more about this concept. And instead of it being a vehicle, I thought more about an e-kit. So an e-kit, or an electric kit, is basically something that could retrofit to any non-motorized vehicle. So what's a non-motorized vehicle? It's basically anything that's pushed, pulled, or pedaled. So think of a wheelchair or a hospital bed or a wheel cart or a tricycle. So adding a kit which comprises a small battery that could come from a used electric car, small motors, power electronics, and maybe a solar panel roof that you could retrofit to these vehicles. And that would make it more affordable. It could be something that could be built locally. Um, and that was the vision I had, not to make something here and then export it around the world, but to really work with local communities all around the world to to localize this solution and to then see this solution work in those local environments to provide affordable mobility, as well as power, because power is just as important as transport in many parts of the world. So if you have power, you can pump water from underground because the rains may not be very predictable. You can power cell phones. You can provide lighting and so forth. So power and transport together is a very powerful solution. And I still think it's a great solution for disaster relief operations. Think about hurricanes. When you lose power, you often lose access to gasoline and access to the grid. So if you can have a vehicle that can help transport medical supplies or people that just uses the sun for its power source, could be very a powerful idea.
And this is a good segue because you're working on a book right now that sort of brings all these ideas
It does.
together. And do you have a name for the book?
I do. I don't know if it
A
will be the
working
final.
title,
A
at least.
working title is Putting the Heart Back into Technology, and it's the subtitle is more around how do we provide sustainable and affordable mobility for everybody.
So now you're not just talking about super low cost transportation in Africa and poor
Right.
countries. You're talking more global solutions here.
Exactly. And I think the technologies that are being developed today by the auto industry, whether it's around autonomy, connectivity, electrification, I think that they can be applied very effectively to enable this transition. And that's what I'm excited about, is to repurpose the applications of these enabling technologies and make it possible for everybody to have access to mobility wherever they are. So if you're somebody who is very poor and can't afford to buy a car, but you need to be able to go door to door somewhere. It's very hard today. You have to walk maybe a long distance to get to a train station or a bus station. And then at the other end, you may have to walk a long distance as well. So what if we could take the friction out of this process? Today, renting a car is inconvenient for a lot of people. But if you have autonomous technology and if you have fleet management and maintenance services and insurance services that are being developed to support robo taxis, those same enablers can make it frictionless to access a vehicle.
So paint a picture here
Yeah.
of the world. We're a little bit into the future right now, and
Mhm.
people have adopted Chris Borroni-Bird's
Yes.
ideas. What would my typical day look like?
So let's say you wanted to go the other side of town, and there is a train or a bus that takes you most of the way. Well, what if you could summon a vehicle? So each city may have a series of um, transport stations, bus stations, train stations, where you'd house a small number of these autonomous pods, which might be 2 or 4 seat vehicles that could be recharged at the train station, um, maybe from solar power potentially. Um, and then you would, on your phone, you would summon it like summoning an Uber driver or an Uber today. But instead of it being an Uber with an Uber driver in it, it's one of these autonomous pods. And it would come to your house or wherever you happen to be when you command the vehicle to come to you. And it would take you there to the train station or the bus station. And once there, you would take the bus across town or wherever, or you could take one of these pods a longer distance as well, potentially. But the idea is that public transport would be cheaper, typically. And the cities want to promote public transport as well, rather than adding more and more congestion to the city, which would happen if everybody was to take potentially a robo-taxi. So the idea would be to connect you to bus stations or train stations that would take you a long way across the city. And then at the other end, you would summon another vehicle, which would probably be right at the train station or bus station, and it would take you to your final destination. So in this way, and then when you get to your final destination, you don't have to worry about the vehicle. The vehicle is going to drive back autonomously. So the same technology that's being developed by robotaxi developers such as Waymo today can be repurposed or reused for this scenario, where maybe these pods have a 3 mile or 5 mile radius of operation around each major transport hub. So they only stay inside that hub, but they provide last mile connectivity to the train stations or the bus stations. And this way, people who can't afford a car can still have door-to-door mobility. Because no matter how good public transport is today, or how fit you are, if you can cycle, or there's still going to be times when you want to get into a vehicle, whether you because it's raining, or because you're disabled, or because you're carrying heavy stuff. So you need that vehicle to take you. Um, but this connectivity is missing today. So, but with the technologies that are being developed by the auto industry, mobility as a service begins to be practical. Or take the example of somebody who is better off wealth-wise and currently has 3 vehicles in their household. Maybe they can go down to 1 or 2 vehicles and then use this service for the occasional times that they need a larger, heavier vehicle with more utility. So a future scenario might be that at the weekend you summon an SUV, let's say, to come to your house, and then you either drive it manually or drive it autonomously. But today, people don't want to hassle and go into a rental car agency to rent an SUV for the weekend use. So people buy a big sized vehicle for that, 2% of the time that they actually need that utility, and most of the time they're not, and they're dragging around a lot of extra weight in the vehicle, and it's creating more safety issues for vulnerable road users such as pedestrians and cyclists, because vehicles are getting bigger and heavier with every generation. It's putting more strain on the road infrastructure. Um, so I think there's a lot to be said for right sizing the vehicles, and then just using larger vehicles when you actually need that utility. But today there's too much friction for that to be practical or convenient for a lot of people. But I do think that the technologies that are being developed can take that friction out, and I'm excited about that future.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, most rental agencies are at airports, so you'd have to go to the airport to be able to go rent a car in most
Yes.
cases. But you're taking this idea farther beyond just having autonomous cars that are available on demand in a small, let's say, 3 mile radius, train station to train station, bus station, subway. Uh, you're talking about very lightweight vehicles that are also manufactured locally.
I am.
Go into detail on
Yes.
that concept.
I think this is potentially an opportunity for many of the traditional car companies to not necessarily reinvent their business model, but augment their existing business model with new market opportunities. Um, and I think the idea is it could be helped and supported by cities. So if you have a city that decides to um, enforce speed controls, and there's technology being developed that allows the vehicle to know what the speed limit is where it is, and to control the vehicle speed. So if you're in a downtown area where the speed limit is 25 miles per hour, if you can be confident that no vehicle's going above 25 miles per hour, then it begins to be practical to think about designing vehicles that may not have to meet all the same crash safety standards as traditional cars have to meet. And they can be made out of a wider choice of materials, perhaps even waste materials, and tackle local waste dumps, or from natural materials like bamboo or wood. So you have a much wider palette of materials to choose from, which may be better for the environment and cheaper. Um, and the vehicles themselves don't need to be designed to go 300 miles or 100 miles an hour. They can be much lighter and cheaper. And the idea here is to create vehicles that could be made locally and designed and developed locally and create good quality jobs. So I see a vision here where car companies could partner with local governments, cities, or even states, and say, we want to work to create fleet vehicles that can be used either for moving goods or for moving people, like the type I just talked about. It could be used for moving goods last mile or that last few miles in the city, or it could be used for moving people around. And this could be a new business for the car companies, because in many big cities today, um, people don't drive a car. So the you're not really taking away sales from your current business. You're augmenting it. These would be new vehicles that could be created, and they could actually build on the city's heritage. Imagine you're the mayor of a city and say, I want to create good jobs, good quality jobs, designing, developing, and making these vehicles. I'm going to have a design competition. Let's come up with the design that we want for our vehicles that promotes our heritage and culture. And let's see what materials it should be made out of based on local availability and so forth. And then it would be electric powered, it could be autonomous, it would be connected, it would be a high tech vehicle, but with low performance requirements. So it could be made very affordably and create good quality jobs and tackle waste and hopefully reuse waste materials and use waste batteries.
Have you thought about or have you even modeled how many of these low cost autonomous vehicles would you need and where they would be placed? Because here's what I'm asking. If I could bring out my cell phone and order a car and know absolutely it's going to be there in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I can
Yeah, yeah.
plan ahead, but I can reliably know it's going to be there. I'll start using it. But if all
Absolutely.
of a sudden I want to get going now and there's not a car available, I'm going to revert back to the old way of doing things.
You're absolutely right. So this would make a lot more sense potentially for goods movement initially. I see goods movement being the first application of this, and then people movement for people who currently don't have an alternative, who don't have a car. So they don't have this choice of getting into their regular car. This is their choice. Either they walk or they wait for this vehicle to come to. So to me, that's the low hanging fruit. And if you look at a traditional big city like New York or London, you're probably talking several thousand taxis. So that gives you an idea of the size of this market that I'm thinking of. And if this same pod could be used in multiple cities in a region, you're talking a significant number of vehicles, where you can get some scale economies.
I could even see an interim step where you still have, because people will say, well, I can call a taxi, I can call an Uber, but they don't have the kind of vehicle that you're talking about, super low cost, super
Exactly.
lightweight. That's really the key to making this work in that regard.
It's not only the key to making the vehicles a lot cheaper and cheaper to operate as well, because they're not only cheaper in terms of their bill of material, but they have much lower operating costs. But it's also about creating good quality jobs. A lot of the technology that's being developed today by high tech companies has a dark side to it, and one of those is the loss of jobs and good jobs. And this is a way of, again, putting the heart back in technology and thinking about the end user more and thinking about the environment more. And so instead of thinking about the concerns with cybersecurity and artificial intelligence and robots and ethics and all those things, I'm thinking more around circular economy, solar power, right sizing the vehicles, creating good quality jobs, designing, developing, making these vehicles. Each community could do this themselves to some extent,
And
or they could do it for themselves and then service nearby cities and regions as well.
right, but the idea, what I like about this local manufacturing is you could design a vehicle that uses local resources. So,
Exactly.
so different parts of the world or the country might have completely different
Exactly.
designs, but idealized to their location.
Absolutely. Instead of a Volkswagen or Toyota or GM or Ford making a certain vehicle in a factory and then supplying that same vehicle to taxi fleets all over the world, this would be around customizing the vehicle to the local conditions and local demands. You know, as a simple example, vehicles that don't need to go or don't need to be designed to go several hundred miles at high speeds, the seats can be made a lot cheaper and simpler, and it doesn't take as much to heat and cool them. So heating and cooling takes a lot of energy in a car today. It can be 20% of the energy demand for a vehicle can be the heating and cooling easily. Well, if you get away from this forced blowing method that we've been using for the last 50 years and have heated seats and heated steering wheels or cooled steering wheels and cooled seats, then the demand for heating and cooling goes way down. And I really believe that if you have solar panel roof in many parts of the world, you could get nearly all of your energy requirements from the sun if the vehicle is made efficient enough, instead of it just being considered as a way to blow air when the vehicle is parked, which is what solar panels have been used to in the past. You could fundamentally use it to generate maybe 10, 15, 20 miles range per day in these lightweight vehicles. So think of something like a rickshaw in India or a golf cart here. Um, the energy demand for those vehicles is substantially less than even a highly efficient Tesla vehicle, just because the vehicle is so much lighter. Um, so this begins to get to the point of not only can the vehicles themselves be made more sustainably from local materials and from waste materials and from natural materials, they can get their energy from the sun and use less energy in their operation as well. So we're tackling all phases of the vehicle.
How do you make it happen? And I say it from this standpoint. We talked at the earlier part of this conversation of you coming out with the autonomy, inventing the skateboard. That was what, 20 years ago?
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
only
I
just
know.
now starting to see it happen. You came up with the idea for the Envy,
Indeed.
the
It
little
takes time.
autonomous
Yeah,
pod.
yeah.
That hasn't happened either yet. And yet that was what, at least a decade ago,
Yes, it
right?
was
More,
2010.
more.
2010. Yeah.
And so you're writing a book about this, and that's great. A book's going to come out. There's going to be people like me that are going to read it and go, we should be doing this. But what's the next step to make it happen?
Well, there's a couple of possible answers to that question. One is there are some cities in Europe that are really seriously considering banning cars from the city center. I don't mean from the whole of the metropolitan area, but the city center where there's a lot of historic buildings and dense population. There's a real consideration of banning cars from the city center. That creates conditions to introduce a new type of vehicle that doesn't have to meet all the crash requirements anymore, but still is useful for transporting people short distances. For the reasons I mentioned before, you might be disabled or it might be raining or what have you. So this could be a test bed. I think European cities could be a test bed for this approach if they begin to ban cars. And a mayor of a European city that says, I'm going to create good quality jobs to replace or as part of this outcome of banning cars, it could gain more support locally from the people if you actually create good quality jobs. The second argument is that currently the traditional car companies are facing, what may be an existential crisis, in terms of the threat from lower cost and in many cases superior Chinese automobiles, because the Chinese market is a hotbed of innovation, and they're creating really compelling electric vehicles. So the traditional car companies here in North America and in Europe and other parts of the world, I think, have an incentive to look for new markets, to supplement their existing business and not rely simply on making, relatively expensive cars that only rich people or wealthy people can afford. I think that retreat has to stop, and they need to find new markets and going after fleets, working with local governments, and creating vehicles that are truly sustainable and affordable is the right solution. And if they can leverage technologies that they're using anyway, like GM owns Cruise, for example. Cruise is developing technology that could be very relevant here. I think it could be a win-win.
It could be, and I would also add, Ford is with Ford Pro looking at fleet management
Absolutely.
technology
Yes,
that which fits in perfectly.
exactly.
So you're right. They've got the building blocks if they want to take this on.
That's the right way to put it. Yeah.
Real good. Chris Borroni-Bird, always fascinating to talk with you. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas. Any idea when your book will be out?
Well, it's meant to be completed by the end of this year, so it'll be coming out the first half of next year.
Very good. Chris,
Thank you.
thanks again. Great talking with you.
Nice talking to you too. Thank you.